Good evening, my name is Josh Nichols, and I'm here to talk about neural mechanisms in planning and initiating voluntary muscle action. Basically, we'll start with a summary and overview of everything we're going to be talking about, of all the different parts involved. Everything's basically revolved around the central nervous system, or CNS. The CNS is comprised of the brain here and the spinal cord or spinal column. Basically, the brain is comprised of millions and millions and millions of neurons, which are nerve cells that contain these cool little things called motor neurons. They're comprised of dendrites here, as you can see, and that comes down to sort of a tail or a bridge, if you will, called the axon, to where it meets the muscle at a neuromuscular junction. This is how all the actual information is sent from the brain, from the neurons where it's created, out all the way to the muscle, and basically a simple summary. Basically, all the action potential and voluntary movement starts with the brain. Planning a voluntary action requires calculation and self-conscious decision making, and basing it off of prior events and memory. So basically, it all starts with planning. Planning will start in the brain. After planning and gathering all information before making a voluntary movement, your brain starts initiation. And in the initiation phase, it happens over multiple parts of the brain, such as the diencephalon, cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum houses the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for purposeful movements, for initiating the actual movement itself. The motor cortex is responsible for voluntary movements and is located in the rear of the frontal lobe. So you'll see right here in this picture, this is the primary motor cortex, and up here is the upper motor cortex, and here is your frontal lobe. So you can see just where the cortex is actually set. And this picture actually gives a very simple overview of how the pathways of the action potential being sent. So up here you'll see in the upper primary motor cortex is where your action is going to be developed. You're going to be thinking about your prior knowledge and things like that. It's all going to be planned and then initiated and sent through the brainstem, which regulates flow of information between the rest of your body and your brain. And it's going to be sent through the brainstem to the inner part of the spinal column. The inner part of the spinal column also regulates information of what goes to your brain and what comes from the brain out to the rest of your peripheral nervous system, or your PNS. And then from there comes to your outer spinal column, where you'll see these nerves right here coming off the outer spinal column, and that is sent out to your actual muscle. And you'll see another good representation of these outer nerves of the spinal column is this yellow right here, are all these nerves coming off the spinal column that actually send the information. So basically, everything's going to originate in your motor cortex for any sort of motor movement, which is then sent through the different parts of your brain, such as the thalamus, the diencephalon, the basal ganglia, and the thalamus and cerebellum. The cerebellum, it actually fine-tunes all the movements and makes them smooth. So, it's not a quirky, jerky, herky movement that your body's performing. And then it's sent through the brainstem, which again regulates that information that's being sent back and forth between the brain and the body. And the brainstem actually also controls involuntary movements like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and consciousness. And then the final part of the CNS is the spinal cord. The spinal cord is groups of neurons sending and receiving signals from the body, between the body and the brain. So basically, we have as an overview of how information is sent. We'll just kind of start with a movement path. So everything's going to start in the association cortex in the brain, in the basal ganglia and cerebellum. Here the movement is thought of and kind of refined. And then your movement is based on, in this area, it's going to be based on past experiences and memories of the movement. Did this happen last time? Do I want to move this way this time so that I'm not hurt or scared or anything like that? This info is then sent to the motor cortex, and motor cortex is going to refine that movement, and then it's going to start to initiate that movement plan. And then it's sent through the brainstem here, and the brainstem will then send it through to the spinal cord, and then, as I mentioned earlier, through the inner spinal cord to the outer spinal cord, and that will be sent to the voluntary muscles. The movement can all be modified by our natural feedback or closed loop control. When the PNS senses changes in the physical environment. So, if we're taking a step and we see that, the step we're stepping on crumbles or moves out of the way, we can, that closed loop, that feedback control is going to send that back to the brain, and it's all going to change basically in real time. In those milliseconds, it's going to change that quickly, that we're going to change our voluntary movement as we're moving. So basically a good example of that is, I have a video of Kyrie Irving. You'll see him right here. I don't know if you can see the cursor. This here's Kyrie Irving. You'll see him go up for this layup, and the guy's coming across to block him. And he moves out of the way as he's in midair and lays up the ball and makes the shot. He sees that the defender is coming to swat it away, but he moves out of the way and makes the shot anyway, which is his feedback control telling his body to move. And all that is happening within a split second.